Hi, this is John Watson. Welcome to the first conference call. Where you've been is hopefully in the area of doing the pre-work. And now that you're on the call, we ask you always to remember to review the YouTubes before being on the call to familiarize yourself with the content and have in hand the PDF summary so that you can follow along on the call as your colleagues and you discuss issues that may have been raised from the pre-work or any other work as the calls proceed. Remember, if you do put your phone on mute, which is always a good idea, please don't have background music, etc. running at that time. The calls depend entirely on questions, give and take, etc. So there's no such thing as a dumb question. And remember that if you have a question that isn't addressed or you haven't had time to bring up, please list on the listserv your question and we'll get to it. The expectations of the Institute for Ideal Medical Home are that at least half of the participants will succeed in the first cycle. At least that's been our experience, and many others seem to get it later over time. So persistence has its value. Of course, we're not going to go into great depth on many topics, but we will be offering special sessions on access, efficiency, and planning care. And we urge everyone to go through the full course before going into in-depth topics at a later time. Full CME requires call attendance, hand in a pre-work, documentation of how's your health or care vital signs in a number of patients, and at least one PDSA. Participation in the activities of the Institute for Medical Home certainly can help practices attain medical home certification if they wish it. We will be providing more details about this activity later in the course. Why a patient-centered medical home? Well, briefly, it's the right thing to do. Despite all the jargon, everybody agrees that the patient should be at the center. More importantly, from our own perspective, it's an efficient and effective thing to do. When patients are in control, when we're on the same page with our patients, we end up in a much better position, and so do the patients with a much better outcome. Ultimately, patients appreciate being involved in their care and will use technology if we properly introduce it to them. And when they use technologies, they can actually provide us very valid documentation and in addition load our registry and do a lot of the work that otherwise our office staff would have to provide. Finally, we always want to have a measure because without measures we can't figure out what we're doing. We don't attain good results. So how are we doing? As you can see on the left-hand side, if you map yourself compared to other practices, you'll be able to determine, are you in the happy or good green zone, or do you have a lot of room for improvement? We've found in the past rather good agreement between practice performance on exactly the care measure and other measures, more in-depth measures. That is, if you're doing great on the single measure, you're likely to do well on measures such as continuity, coordination, access, efficiency, style of communication with the patient, quality of communication, whether it's good or excellent, and even to some degree the patient's self-management, confidence, and preventative bioclinical markers such as hemoglobin A1C. This slide in greater detail shows the degree of agreement between those medical home attributes such as access, etc., and other measures. And you see that a good medical home eventually leads to better communication, which in turn leads to better patient self-measurement, which in turn leads to confidence and better outcomes from which we're paid. Now, in the world in which we all work, we know there are multiple dimensions that we have to be aware of, and we have to deal with them in tight time. For example, among diabetics, 45% have other diagnoses that we have to deal with. Functional limits, at least half of them have that. 2 or more symptoms. And in addition to that, they also have health habits that we may want to deal with. A lot has to be done. One way to deal with this multidimensional complexity is to ask the patient at the time of an office visit, in addition to the usual vital signs, what we call care vital signs, which get us on the path toward better management of the patient. We ask what matters to the patient. We ask questions that are actionable, high leverage behaviorally, and enable us to place the patient in categories. For example, in the past we have begun to ask about pain. Now we ask that practices check or use the C of care to check on other important issues. Once the patient has been categorized into a category based on that, then we might begin to do the action, the reinforcement, and the engineering in the practice, the ARE, that is necessary. And in the reading materials that accompany care vital signs, we give examples such as those shown here. Practices soon find, as they incorporate such a simple tool as care vital sign, that they have to think through how they're organizing their care to get the results they want. This leads to efficiency. It's just very powerful. Here are results from Care South Carolina that takes care of patients who are at 5th grade reading level. And using care vital sign type approach, they began to monitor how confident their patients were with self-management of chronic diseases. It didn't matter too much what type, and we'll talk about that later. It doesn't really matter what the disease is. It matters very much how confident the patient is to manage that condition. And by using simple techniques, they've been able to have dramatic results in a short period of time. Well, what are those techniques? Well, imagine tomorrow you were to categorize your patients or segment them based on their confidence. What problem solving and other actions would you do next? How would you reinforce the intervention over time? And how would you monitor to make sure that confidence is happening in the patients, and what modifications would you make? We offer also How's Your Health as a supportive mechanism for confidence building in your patients and building your practice capacity to better manage the patients, to segment them into meaningful categories, using the registry in How's Your Health to document what's going on, to get on the same page with the patients. At the same time, your patients have a personal health record, engage in problem solving, shared decision making, activities that in a typical practice you just wouldn't have the time or energy to provide. The content of these first 3 YouTubes interrelate very closely. And the bottom line for practice, after viewing these YouTubes and discussing them on a phone call, is to go back and use How's Your Health on some patients, play with the problem solving, look at decisions in the gray, become familiar with the tools that are out there, and then try care vital signs. That'll do it.